Hello, everyone. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is, it is Tuesday, November 19th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start just breaking down the playoff tiers. We are getting very close to the home stretch here, and want to break down just where everyone sits, at least in my mind, as of right this second. Then we'll get to the playoff math. We'll kind of break down where everyone is going to come from, which conference is going to get the most teams. Feels like it's going to be the SEC, but maybe a little bit of tie between the SEC and the Big Ten. We'll also get into the ACC, the Big 12, the Group of 5, and Notre Dame. We'll get into all the scenarios that could unfold from that. Then we'll get to the Week 12 winners and losers from this past weekend. Definitely a lot, including a lot of people outside of Athens, Georgia, are not very happy right now, and I'll break it down in that segment. Then we'll get into Week 12 superlatives, a ton of big-time things, and maybe the game of the week down there in Columbia, South Carolina. And then we'll get to my top 15 Tuesday, all the teams that I think are the best going into the Week 13 slate. I thought about mixing it up just a little bit, but I kept with the status quo. Didn't want to mix up the way I was going about business at least too much. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use the super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that as you please. And also, GSMCpodcast.net is still up and working, does the exact same thing. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing, because we got to get to these playoff tiers. We are getting very, very close to the finish line. It feels like we know remotely where everyone stands as we head forward, and one of these teams feels like they are already in the field. But let's go ahead and break this down, and we'll start with the teams that if you handle business, you are in. And I think if you handle business in the regular season, I'll get into the bubble here in a second, and we'll talk about some different teams that could face some trouble even if they win out. But as of right now, let's get to the teams that if you handle business, you are in no matter what. And it's this group. Oregon, frankly, probably already in, if I'm being totally honest. I think if they could lose next weekend to Washington after the bye, they could lose in the Big Ten Championship, and they're still probably hosting a playoff game. I think that's probably how this is going to go. So Oregon's in a really good spot right now. I think they're probably in regardless of really whatever happens the rest of the way. I think Oregon's probably in the field, and that's the only team that's probably in the field right about this moment. But Ohio State, they just need to get to Indy. Obviously, an 11-1 Ohio State that goes to the Big Ten Championship is not getting left out. Even if they get blown out by Oregon, maybe if they lose to Indiana, they could still find their way in. I think they would still be in a good position. I don't think it would be a great position necessarily. You'd have a loss to Indiana and Oregon. You'd have a win over Penn State. You'd be up against, Tennessee and a couple other teams that we'll talk about here in a second. So I think they do have to get to Indianapolis. I tend to believe that they'll do that, but we'll get into that here in the rest of the week when we break down that big-time game that's going on in Columbus this weekend. But Penn State also here at Minnesota this week is a little bit sketchy, no doubt about that. But if they get through that and they get through Maryland, they're going to be in, no doubt about that. I feel pretty confident that they would host a game in that scenario, but I still think there's some mixing around that could possibly happen. But if they do lose one more, I think they would fall below Tennessee. I think they would be the team that would probably get left out from this conference at the end of the day because don't necessarily have that marquee win. If you do get two losses, I think we've all found that that's probably where you get knocked out. If you don't have that big-time win like Tennessee has over Bama or Georgia has over Texas and Tennessee and a lot of different things happening in the SEC that's keeping some of these teams in, just won't be there for Penn State. So if they lose one more, they are fully out. If they win out the rest of the way, I expect them to be hosting a playoff game. And then you got Georgia. They might have punched their ticket on Saturday. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because Georgia Tech does everything in their ability to confuse things and make things a little bit tougher. So we'll find out in the last weekend if they fully have gotten in, but I expect them to get in. And hypothetically, they can still get to Atlanta if Alabama were to fall to Auburn in a couple of weeks or Oklahoma this weekend. So still a lot on the table for this Georgia Bulldog team, but UMass, Georgia Tech, win those two games. You are in, probably traveling somewhere else, but we'll see how all of that shakes out. And then Ole Miss, the team that beat them a couple of weeks ago, they're just sitting there waiting for a trip to Gainesville. A terrifying place to go play right about now. So it's going to be really tough, and then they get Mississippi State, obviously, in the Egg Bowl to finish it off. Those two wins, you would definitely get in. Now, that Florida game is a little bit sketchy. We'll get into that one tomorrow, but definitely one to watch. And this Ole Miss team, I think they're a team that if they got in, no one should want to play them. But we'll get into that throughout the next couple of weeks. For Alabama, they are in the SEC title if they win out. And even if they lose that game, I think they would still be in. There is some interesting mathematics there. But when we talk about the CFP and all of this stuff, punishing the loser of the Big Ten or SEC championship is something that they kind of can't do. And we'll get into that kind of throughout the week, but it would be a death sentence in a lot of different ways. So I wouldn't necessarily love that. I think Alabama, if they get to the SEC championship, is absolutely in. We'll see what happens. Obviously, a 10-3 Alabama is going to be one of those weird teams, but I don't think the loser of the SEC or the Big Ten is really going to get punished too much. Then we got the CFP bubble, and I'll start with those two Texas teams. They're only on here because of the game at the end of the year. I think if they both win out, go to the SEC title, I think they're probably in. A&M's another team that could be that 10-3 team in that scenario. Texas could be 11-2 with maybe not quite the quality win that Tennessee has over Alabama, but they would have gone on the road and played at A&M. So that would have given them a little bit of a leg up. I imagine if they get to the SEC championship, both of these Texas teams are in. Obviously, it's going to come down to that last game. Whoever wins that one in College Station is going to be the team probably in the SEC championship. They have a couple of games this week that we'll talk about in the upset alert segment tomorrow, so it could get a little bit interesting down the stretch. But at the end of the day, I do think one of these two teams will be in the SEC championship. One team will be fully out, and it will come from that game, which just cannot wait for. And then you got Notre Dame. I think that's a team that they're on the bubble until zeros hit on that USC game, and they have a win. They need to go 11-1, especially with the loss that they have. Frankly, I could easily make the argument they should be out even at 11-1, but the CFP has proven their point. Notre Dame will be in if they go 11-1. If they lose one more, they are officially out. For Indiana, they're in a tough spot. This is an ultimate test weekend, no doubt about that. Everyone at the CFP rankings is going to be watching them very, very closely. We probably won't know if they passed that test or if they failed it until the rankings come out next Tuesday, which is very, very frustrating. We'll have to wait multiple days for this to kind of be resolved. But we'll kind of know on Saturday. We'll be able to at least tell with our football brains what Indiana did, how close they were to winning, all of that type of thing. We'll be able to kind of decipher that. But we won't fully know until those CFP rankings come out, and Tennessee is going to be the team that's watching it very closely. Tennessee can win out and miss the CFP. I feel very confident about that. I think if Indiana were to win this weekend, obviously, but if they were to lose this weekend by 3 points, there's no way they should be out. There's no way they should be out even if they lose by 17. But we can talk about that in time. That's obviously a big debate that's been going on. But there's a ton of teams on top of them that can fall. Right now, they are that 13th team, at least in my mind. Maybe we'll be told something different in the rankings tonight, but they would need a Notre Dame to fall. They would need Indiana to get rolled this weekend. They would need maybe another SEC team to fall out. Ole Miss loses to Florida this weekend. A&M or Texas loses Kentucky, and it opens up some things just a little bit for them. So this is kind of the group where you're going to do your best. If you win out, I think for Texas and Texas A&M in particular, and Notre Dame really, if you win out, you are in. Tennessee is in that kind of weird spot. Indiana, if you win this weekend, you're definitely in. If you lose this weekend, then you just have to wait for those rankings and hope that it comes up you. But then you got the championship and in crowd, and that's really the Big 12 and the ACC. That's really kind of the end-all, be-all of this. Miami, we've talked about it. They got to win out the rest of the way. If they don't, it will be Clemson SMU in that championship game. For the Big 12 teams, you got Colorado. It's simple. Just win. Get to your conference championship. If you lose this weekend, everything kind of falls apart because you don't have the tiebreakers that a lot of other teams have in the Big 12. You are going to have to win out, no doubt about that. So a tough game this weekend that we'll talk about tomorrow. We'll break it down, but they're 3 wins away from a CFP berth in Deion's second year. It's just insane. I'll talk about it. I'm going to break that one down a little bit later in the week because I don't think people are fully appreciating how insane that is. But BYU came back to the crowd just a little bit this past weekend. The good news is they had a little bit of a buffer. They're going down to Arizona State this upcoming weekend. They win. They're likely in Arlington, barring some crazy turn of events in the last weekend. For Arizona State, they win this weekend. They're in a really, really great spot. It's not necessarily, they're going to the Big 12 championship where they can punch their ticket this weekend, but if they can take care of Arizona, which a lot of teams in the Big 12 have been able to, they should be in a great spot, and they should be in the Big 12 championship. You also have Iowa State here. They're kind of in a weird spot where they're going to need a little bit of help. They're a little bit in a pack that we'll talk about actually here in a second. But Iowa State, they're still very much in this, need a Colorado loss, but at the end of the day, they win out, Colorado loses this weekend, they're right back in that race. And then Oh, excuse me. And then you do have SMU, obviously the team that is leading the ACC right now. If they lose the next 2 weekends, then it could be Miami Clemson in the championship. I know that sounds crazy, but that is still technically in the cards. I don't expect them to lose the next 2 weekends. If they win this weekend, they're going to Charlotte for the ACC championship. And then you got the group of five gang. It is three teams, pretty much. I mean, barring disaster, it is three teams that will get into this thing one way or the other. Boise State seems to be the one that's kind of leading the way. As of right now, I've said my piece on Boise State. I think Tulane's a better team in the group of five. I also think Boise State has a ton better resume. So the argument can go either way. I'll talk about it actually a little bit later when I break down my top 15. But Tulane is a team that they're just hoping for a Boise State loss at some point. That is what they're waiting for. If they went out the rest of the way, if Boise State loses one more, I believe that Tulane would be in. Maybe Boise would still get that nod depending on the way those games go. I think Tulane at 11-2 would get in over an 11-2 Boise State. Still up for debate, but we'll see what happens. And then Army, if you win this weekend, I think you're in the driver's seat. I think you would jump Boise State. You would be the team that would have that group of five slot, but then you would also take it from Notre Dame. So a lot of things would kind of shift around in the rankings there. But at the end of the day, we could see maybe Boise State and Army in that rankings at the end of the day. But it's going to be really interesting to watch. If they beat UTSA at the end of the year and then beat Tulane, they probably would need another Boise State loss, but at the end of the day, they could get in even if they lose to Notre Dame this weekend. It's just got to be a couple more things that fall their way than normal. And then the still technically in it, but not really in it group is pretty much the rest of the Big 12. The Big 12 still has 8 teams that are technically alive for Arlington. So oh, excuse me, my throat's killing me today. But technically, Kansas State, Baylor, Texas Tech, West Virginia, and TCU, as well as Iowa State and all the other 3 we just talked about, are still in the conversation. I know that sounds crazy. They still can technically make it. Absolute chaos happens, and it's the Big 12. So we'll keep you updated there. I don't think any of those teams will make it to Arlington, but this weekend could decide a lot of that. And then South Carolina. I would be shocked if South Carolina find a way in. I don't think they should be in. I think taking that third loss should eliminate you in pretty much every single conference, in pretty much every single year. Obviously, that changes from year to year, but in this year in particular, a 9-3 team just shouldn't get in. Now, we can talk all day about whether or not South Carolina should be 10-2 because of that LSU game, but at the end of the day, they are 9-3. We have to work with what we have, and it sucks to see, but that's a very, very good team that's building towards 2025 in a very real way, regardless of what happens the rest of the way here. So, a tough end of the season where you feel like you're one of the best, 12, 15 teams in the country, but you did lose 3 games early. I don't think any of these teams are really in it, but technically they are in it if everything goes crazy the last couple of weeks. But it's been really hard to break all this down. I mean, we do have one off the list. I think Oregon's in regardless of what happens the next couple of weeks. They are already in the Big Ten Championship. I talked about it. I don't think the CFP committee is going to be able to really punish anyone that loses in the Big Ten or the SEC Championship in this format, because then there would be some meetings between the Big Ten and the SEC about finding their own place to play. But that's a conversation that is going to build over the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we won't have to deal with the reality of that. But definitely something to watch, and we'll get into the math of all of this. We'll get into how many Big Ten teams are getting in, how many SEC teams getting in, how many ACC, Big 12, Notre Dame's a huge piece in this, and we'll break down a little bit of that Indiana-Tennessee conundrum that is making a lot of people on Twitter mad. But I'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the playoff tiers, tried to break down where everyone sits as we get into the final 2 weeks, really the home stretch here, and there's still plenty of chaos that can unfold, but we're starting to get a little bit clearer of a picture, and we'll get into that right about now. Who's in and where are they coming from is a big time question that people have been asking. I mean, Big Ten and SEC fans on Twitter right now going at each other very, very aggressively around Indiana, around Tennessee, and let's break it all down here because this thing is getting a little bit confusing, at least for me, but let's jump into this, and I think the biggest question and one of the biggest debates as we get closer is in the Big Ten, or excuse me, we're starting with the SEC. I had my notes a little bit out of order here, but let's get into the SEC first. The SEC has a lot less scenarios for the conference title now that LSU has fallen out of that equation. Makes things a little bit easier for the CFP, not a ton easier. I'm not going to touch South Carolina because it would be a nightmare to figure out how they would possibly make their way back up. So we're focusing on those top 6 teams. Those are the teams that are really in this race. Those are the teams that are really fighting for something down the stretch. Georgia and Ole Miss, we talked about them. If they win out, they're in. I don't think there's a ton of question there. I do think there's a little bit of question when you get beyond that. Now, you have an Alabama team. I'm 90% sure if they win out, they are in, regardless of what happens in the SEC title. There is a world where you have a 10-3 Alabama team coming off an SEC title loss. You have a 10-2 Tennessee team that didn't go to the SEC championship but beat Alabama. How do you handle that? Because I think that's a very interesting conversation. I don't necessarily think they're going to punish an Alabama team that went to the SEC championship because you're going to be put in a really bad spot down the stretch if you have teams actively avoiding the championship, which we'll talk about the Lane Kiffin comments down the road, but upsetting at the very least. But at the end of the day, it would put you in a tough spot. Alabama would have one more loss. One of the losses would be to the team that has a pretty comparable schedule, a pretty comparable resume, but they have the win over you. So it's going to be a really hard argument. I think Alabama would still get in over Tennessee, but Tennessee fans would be none too happy. I can promise you that. Again, for Texas, I think they are in if they win out. I feel pretty confident if they go to Atlanta, it's not going to be a question. They could be in at 10-2 if they lose to A&M, but a lot of stuff would have to happen. They would immediately drop to the back of the line behind Tennessee, behind Ole Miss, and all of those other teams, and then they would just have to hope that Ole Miss loses, that Tennessee loses to Vanderbilt, that Georgia loses to Georgia Tech. So too much stuff would have to happen there. If they go 10-2, they're in trouble, no doubt about that. They wouldn't have the quality win. I've said it before, a 10-2 Texas should not get into the field by any means. And then Texas A&M, kind of the same thing for Texas. The caveat is if they lose to Texas, they're done. There's no, making your way back up. There's no, maybe a million things could happen and they could find their way back in. But with the loss to South Carolina, they would drop all the way below them. There's no way they're finding their way back up. So while Texas technically has a chaos scenario that they could get in 10-2, I don't think A&M has the same luxury. We'll see what happens the rest of the way. Or they wouldn't be at 10-2, they'd be at 9-3. So obviously they would be in a lot of trouble. But for Tennessee, this is the team. They're just waiting for a spot. They're waiting for a spot to open up. They're waiting for something to jump at them. And the question is, if they win out and one of Notre Dame, Penn State, Indiana, if they lose by 2 scores or more, we'll talk about kind of the mathematics of all of that here pretty soon. But I think you're in. If anyone else loses above you in the SEC, I believe that you're in. Right now, I think you're the number 13 team. I think if everything plays out normally, you will be the 13th team. If all the, ranked teams win, if all the favored teams win and it rolls out that way, I would expect that to be the outcome for Tennessee. So they're in a tough spot. They're waiting for someone else to lose right about now, or they're waiting for Ohio State to just body bag Indiana. So a lot of things on the plate, and I can say confidently they are big Buckeye fans this weekend. They are big Black Knight fans this weekend because if Notre Dame or Indiana fall, they're in a much better footing as they go forward. But as you can see, there is a very clear line of demarcation here. A&M is right on the outside, and then South Carolina is pretty far down. So A&M is one of those teams that they know if they win out the rest of the way, they're likely in. I think they're one of the teams that a 10-2 A&M, or 10-3 A&M, losing in the SEC championship could be up for debate, but again, I don't think they'll get punished for that. So I do think right now Georgia has the best odds. They just got to win out the next 2 games, regardless of if they go to the SEC championship or not, they are in. And then you do have a team in Tennessee that is still minus odds. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. Maybe after this week, they're even further down the road to getting one of those spots. Maybe they've taken a big step back because Indiana got a 3-point loss or something like that. So going to be interesting to watch that breakdown. But now we'll get over to the Big Ten. And this one is a lot easier. It's a lot more digestible. You have those 4 teams up top, and that's about it. Much respect to Illinois, Minnesota, Iowa. Really love y'all's teams. Not quite on the level of these top 4 teams right here. Oregon, we've talked about them. They have punched their ticket. I don't think anything could happen over the next 2 weeks for them to miss that. Just being totally honest, if you are in a conference championship in the Big Ten or the SEC, I don't think you're missing out. If you do miss out, then maybe it's that Alabama 10-3 against a 10-2 Tennessee type situation. But that's really the only one that I can see that happening in. And then for Ohio State, you just got to win out. I think you could be in with a loss to Indiana, but it would definitely add some questions. You would have that Penn State win, but then you'd be up against Tennessee that would have an Alabama win. So you'd be in that kind of group that you just do not want to be in if you're Ohio State. So I think they would likely be in if they were 10-2, to be totally honest, but the noise from the SEC crowd will be very, very loud, and we'll see what happens there. If they win this weekend, if they win against Michigan, they are in no matter what. If they lose against Michigan, maybe this thing gets a little bit more interesting again. But again, it's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold. Ohio State should be in if everything goes as planned the rest of the way. Penn State, you got to win out. There's really no caveat here. You cannot lose one more game in my mind. You don't really have that win to hang your hat on other than West Virginia to start the year, and not quite the win you want to hang your hat on right about now. So I do think they have to win out the rest of the way. If they don't, they're in a lot of trouble. They still technically can get to Indy for the Big Ten championship, but would need one of these big upsets like Michigan over Ohio State or Purdue over Indiana, I believe is that final game. So, and then we get to the fun team, Indiana. I don't know. I got to be totally honest with you. I've been trying to break down what is the line of demarcation. What is the blowout quotient? I'll put it that way. What is the number that Ohio State has to get to for everyone to just give up on Indiana? I think it's lower than it should be. And I think it will be lower than it should be because I think a lot of people are going to look at a game where they lose by 14, let's say, and no disrespect, I think we all know that a lot of these people don't watch it quite as closely as we would like them to. If they lose by 14, but it was a tough game, Ohio State scores a touchdown with 2 minutes left to win that game, that should get Indiana in. There's no argument in my mind. They should be in because if you're an 11-1 team in one of the toughest conferences in the country, I know the strength of schedule is not great, and we'll have our conversation about the strength of schedule because, man, are people misusing it. But at the end of the day, this Indiana team would be 11-1. They would have a hard-fought game against Ohio State. If you leave them out, you're in trouble. I'm just going to be totally honest with you. You are in a lot of trouble for a number of different reasons, and you're doing a lot of interesting things. But at the end of the day, the flip side of that is if you do let them in at 11-1 and say they lose by 17 points to Ohio State, say they lose by 21, there's another conversation to be had because then you have the conversation of this is an 11-1 team that didn't play too many people out of conference. If we let them in at 11-1 and we leave out Tennessee at 10-2, are we just encouraging people to schedule Western Illinois, to schedule FIU, to schedule Western Carolina or whoever as their out-of-conference game so they can get to that Big Ten slate or that SEC or Big 12 or ACC slate undefeated? That's a question we have to answer because I do think, I've talked about this a lot, I do think we have to lean into strength of schedule a little bit. I think some people are misusing it right now in their arguments, but I do think we have to lean into it just some. So I don't know what the line of demarcation is for Indiana. If they lose decidedly, I guess is the best way that I can put it right now. If they lose decidedly, I do think they would be on kind of that chopping block with Tennessee. If they win, if they're definitely in. If they lose by 3, they're definitely in. If they lose by 7, they're definitely in, and so on and so on. I just don't know when the number changes to they're definitely not in. So it's going to be interesting to watch that unfold, and as you can see, Indiana's still the team that they're the most worried about. They're still the team that if they lose this weekend, we'll find out just how these odds move, and maybe that'll give us a good idea before those rankings come out of how everything sits. But as of right now, Oregon, you're in. Congratulations. You are the first one to punch your ticket to the 12-team playoff. Ohio State, you're likely in. I think even if you lose to Indiana, I think that minus 20,000 tells you even if they lose to Indiana, they still would have a relatively good shot to get in. Penn State, you just got to win out. That's basically it for them. Indiana, you just got to hope. You got to hope that you fight this weekend, and then the CFP rankings treat you the way you probably should be treated if you fight this weekend. But moving over to the easy ones, the Big 12, this one has a ton of chaos scenarios. There are a lot of teams that are still in it. You can go all the way down to, I believe, Texas Tech, and they would still be technically in this race for the Big 12 championship. But we talked about this on here quite a bit. They're officially a one-bid league. That was one thing that was a little bit up in the air going into this weekend, but BYU lost. There's almost no way that someone from the Big 12 or the ACC really is going to get in with 2 losses after a conference championship as an at-large bid. Just not going to happen. We can talk about whether or not that's fair. I think it's more than fair. But at the end of the day, BYU, you just got to win out. You're in a really tough spot, no doubt about that. They technically can drop one of the next 2, but a million things would have to happen. So let's just say they got to win out the rest of the way. They got to handle their business, and a huge one this weekend against Arizona State that we'll break down tomorrow. And then Colorado, same deal. Win out the rest of the way. Kansas is going to do their best to create a mess on this season, and frankly, everyone that plays Colorado the rest of the way is going to want to ruin this. Let's just be totally honest. Not a lot of people like Colorado. They're going to try to take it out on them. No doubt about that. But as of right now, you're good. You're rolling. Continue on your way. Arizona State, one more and just a win-out situation. So you're in a position where you beat BYU this weekend. You're going to be favored against BYU, by the way. We'll break that one down tomorrow as well. And then Arizona at the end of the year. You should be good. If you win those 2 games, you're in Arlington. You're probably playing Colorado or maybe Iowa State or maybe BYU again. Again, it's crazy in the Big 12, but at the end of the day, it is going to be interesting to watch this unfold, and right now, Arizona State's in a relatively good spot as we move forward into all this. Any loss, they're probably out of this thing. And then for Iowa State, they will need a little bit of help. I think that's the other team that I would really bet on possibly making it. They just need a Colorado loss. So one loss from Colorado maybe this weekend against Kansas. They win out the rest of the way, beat Kansas State at the end of the year. They would be in that Big 12 championship. So relatively simple. You know, you got to win this league to get in, no doubt about that. But you got the 4 teams up top. You got a couple other teams that are technically in it, but a lot of those teams will be knocked out this weekend. So we'll have a lot cleaner of a picture in this thing after Saturday. And you see it in the conference championship odds. We talked about it to one-bid league, so figured I'd change up the odds just a little bit here. But Colorado still leads the way. That gap between them and BYU grew just a little bit. Arizona State, that gap is getting shorter and shorter as we go on. Iowa State, obviously needing a little bit of help. And then Kansas State and Baylor, still technically in it, need about a million things to go their way to find their way back in it. So I wouldn't bet on it, but definitely would be crazy to watch. And then we got to get into the ACC really quickly because this one's the quickest one to take care of. You got 3 teams up top, and that's about it. There is not going to be 2 teams from this league. It is likely a one big league, and now Miami win out, and you're in the ACC championship with a spot in the CFP championship. No doubt about that. You have Wake Forest, Syracuse the rest of the way. Win those 2 games, you're meeting SMU, you have a shot to go. That's as simple as can be. Clemson, you're just hoping for a shot. You're hoping for one of those teams in Wake Forest or Syracuse to nip Miami over the next couple of weeks. Then you would be into the ACC championship. And then for SMU, just win this weekend. Win this weekend or next weekend, and you are in the championship game. So obviously beating Virginia this weekend and getting that bid would be more than fine going into that final week. But at the end of the day, it is going to be really interesting to watch. And technically, if they were to lose at Virginia this weekend and then at Cal at the end of the year, Clemson and Miami could be in that championship game. But we'll figure out what happens. The good news is it's just those 3 teams. There's no math that could get them down to the Syracuse getting in or Louisville getting in. So took care of a little bit of business this past weekend. But the odds are very, very simple. Miami's leading the way. SMU not too far behind. Clemson a little bit further behind because they need that one loss. But you know, this is kind of just the way it sits right now. I do tend to believe we're going to see Miami and SMU in that championship, but maybe things go a little bit crazy this weekend and Clemson gets a little bit of their groove back. But finally, group of 5 teams. You got 3. We talked about it earlier. Those are going to be your 3 teams, and I think the biggest thing here is kind of just to break down the pecking order as I see it for these teams. And to me, it goes undefeated Army, they would be in over everyone. If they were to beat Notre Dame, they would be the Group of 5 team. I have a few questions about that. Whether or not a one-loss Boise State would get in, I think is up for debate. I'd be surprised if they got in over a 10-2 Tennessee or someone like that. But at the end of the day, still something to watch there, no doubt about that. But I do think it goes undefeated Army. If they win, they're going to be the team. Then it would go to one-loss Boise State that won the Mountain West Championship. If they do that and Army were to lose to Notre Dame, they would be in. And then I think it would go back to the American champion. Now, I think there's still some question of if Boise State loses a close one this weekend to Wyoming and then goes on to win the Mountain West, 11-2 them against an 11-2 Tulane. Could be a little bit of a battle, but I would expect it would go back to the American champion, so it could be a one-loss Army that lost to Notre Dame, could be a two-loss Tulane. So a lot of things still at play here. We'll break it all down throughout the time, but feels pretty cut and dry. Boise State, if they lose, Army, if they lose, then Tulane. So that's kind of the easiest way to break it down, and we'll see what happens the rest of the way. I've said that Tulane is the best team in the Group of 5. As of right now, if I was on the committee, I'd probably have Boise State in because of the resume, because of the few losses. So it's a battle back and forth between best and most deserving. I'm going to lean most deserving, at least in this respect. So going to be interesting to watch that unfold. And let's get into just the way I see it. Break this down very, very simply as I can. As of right now, the way that I see it is 4 Big Ten, 4 SEC, 1 ACC, 1 Big 12, 1 Group of 5, and Notre Dame. That's the way that it's breaking down right now. I'd expect that to be the way it breaks down if everything goes totally normal, all the favorites win, Indiana doesn't get blown out, all of that craziness. If Indiana does get blown out, if they get beaten by Ohio State decidedly, which we can talk about what decidedly mean. I think everyone has a different definition right about now. But for me, I'm going to say 3 scores. Anything over 3 scores, I would be a little bit worried about. Anything under that, I think they just have to get in. But we'll talk about that in nauseam, I promise, in the next couple of weeks. But if that were to happen, it would be 3 Big Ten. It would be 5 SEC. It would be 1 ACC, 1 Big 12, 1 Group of 5, and Notre Dame. In my mind, that's the way it would break down, as long, obviously, as Notre Dame were to win that game this weekend. And then if Notre Dame were to lose at some point, whether it's an Army this weekend or USC at the end of this, it would be 4 Big Ten, 5 SEC, 1 ACC, 1 Big 12, and 1 Group of 5 with Notre Dame in the mix. So that's as easy as I can make it, really. A lot of confusing numbers out there, a lot of confusing scenarios, but that's about as simple as I can make it right about there. We'll see what decidedly means in that Indiana-Ohio State game in the end of the week, but definitely a lot of different things at play here. Went a little bit long on this one, so got to wrap this up here. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we got winners and losers from this past weekend. Want to wrap up Week 12 for you guys right here in the next couple of segments, so stick around, and we'll be right back with that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about just all of the craziness around the playoff, trying to figure out all of these SEC versus Big Ten. If it's 5 teams, is it 4 teams, is it 3 teams? Is it no? It's going to be crazy. Let's just leave it at that for the time being. It's one of those things that we'll have to keep up on every single week, and that Indiana-Ohio State game could just be the domino that tells us everything. If Ohio State wins by 28, it might be much less of a headache to figure out all of this stuff. If they win by 14, the conversations get very heated in a hurry. I can promise you that, even more heated than they are right now. And if you're on Twitter, man, you've seen it. It's gone very, very aggressive very quickly. But at the end of the day, let's get into the winners and the losers from this past weekend. We'll tie a little bit of a bow on this weekend in the next 2 segments here. But let's get into this. And I think the biggest winner is just Georgia football. Georgia football is back. I mean, that is the Georgia football that we have all become relatively accustomed to. Now, wasn't quite the run game that Georgia is used to by any means, but a dominant defensive performance, a quarterback performance that they've needed for a number of weeks and need going forward, no doubt about that, and they executed. They did the thing that a lot of Georgia teams do where maybe you start a little bit slow, maybe you're down 10-0 after the first quarter, and then you just outright decide you're going to win a game. It genuinely looks like that. It looks like they just decide that we are going to win this game. We are not losing. We are not getting knocked out of the CFP. And they were on a mission the rest of the way. They were really, really incredible. And I think the offensive line is the biggest thing for me. They dominated one of the best groups in the country, maybe the best group in the country at the defensive line position. And it was a huge piece of Carson Beck being able to find his way back into this game. It was not necessarily all that pretty to start, but he was able to get comfortable because he had time to get comfortable. And then he made that one big play where he ran for a first down, gave a little bit of a celebration, and that's when everything flipped. That was the moment where everything in that game flipped. Maybe everything in the season flipped for Georgia, but that's obviously a conversation we'll know more about down the stretch. But Georgia's here, no doubt about that, and I think a lot of teams didn't want to see that, but Georgia is likely into the CFP if they handle business against UMass and Georgia Tech. They will be in that field, and they could be in Atlanta for the SEC championship if Alabama were to lose one of these next two games. So a lot still on the table for this team. I think they're just one of those teams that you never want to see them, especially in those big-time games. You never want to see them, and that's why everyone outside of Athens, Georgia is a big-time loser. Let's just be totally honest. No one wanted to see Georgia win that game, and it's not to say that a Tennessee win wouldn't prove that Tennessee is the better team, wouldn't prove that they're playing better football right now. It's just to say when you see that G, when you see that block G in a big-time game, in a CFP game, and you're a team like, let's say, Indiana, or you're a team even like Texas that's had a run-in with the CFP, but hasn't necessarily gotten there to the consistency or to the level that Georgia has. Georgia has that championship DNA, and it's one of those things that is very hard to quantify. It's very hard to get a beat on. It is very real, though. No one wants to play a Georgia team that has won national titles in some of the biggest games of the season. They also don't want to give Kirby Smart an entire 3 or 4 weeks to prepare for one of these games because that's a nightmare for just about any offense they play. We saw it against Texas. You will see it again in the playoff if that were to happen. So a lot of things still at play here, and Georgia and Bama, they've been dominating the SEC for quite some time. It felt like this year there was a relatively clear path to it being Texas, Tennessee, or A&M's. It sounds crazy, but we were on a path where that was going to be the championship if Tennessee were able to win this weekend, but the big dogs just came right back. So Georgia's one of those teams that maybe they haven't been playing great football, maybe they haven't been the best team in the country, and they definitely haven't, to be totally fair, but they have that thing. They have that thing that pretty much every championship team has had over the last little bit where it's just, we know what this is about. It's what Michigan went through. They went through 2 years where they didn't play all that well, where everything was kind of sputtering in the CFP, and then it all came together because they knew what they were up against. They knew what was coming, and they handled it a lot better than their opponents. So you're in a position now where no one wants to get that Georgia team. I can promise you that. No one wants to be the team that has to invite Georgia into their place. No one wants to be the team that gets Georgia down the stretch of the season because they're on a mission now. And then we got the every Big 12 contender, big-time winner, no doubt about that. BYU opened a huge door for a ton of teams. If BYU were to win this weekend, I think we would only have 4 teams that could get into the Big 12 championship. But they did fall, and now the door is open. The biggest winner to me is Arizona State. Now they have a chance to essentially a play-in game this upcoming weekend. Obviously, got to take his business against Arizona to finish the season, but as of right now, you got to be in a really, really good spot going forward, and we'll see what happens the rest of the way, but as of right now, Arizona State got a huge win from Kansas this past weekend, weirdly enough, and then they're able to set up a game that could very well send them to the Big 12 championship in their first year against another team that possibly is going to the Big 12 championship in their first year in Colorado that got a win this weekend. No doubt about that. They got up to the top team in the league, at least in my mind. Iowa State, relatively unaffected, but confusion, always a good thing for a team that needs a couple of losses down the stretch. When things get a little bit crazy, they definitely love that. So the rest was given a minor shot by not a lot by any means, but you have Kansas, you have Kansas State, you have TCU, you have Texas Tech. They're still technically in it. they're not really in it, but they're still technically in it. But on the flip side of that, because BYU lost this weekend, the two-team hopes for the Big 12 are officially gone. I feel very confident in that. BYU could win it and go. It would be 12-1, so they would definitely be in, but no one else is getting in, especially everyone else would have 3 losses at that point. So no way anyone else is getting in from that group. And then the flip side of that is BYU wins out the rest of the way, but then they're an 11-2 team that lost in the Big 12 championship. That team's not getting in over a 10-2 Tennessee. I'm just going to be totally honest. You can call it SEC bias. I call it putting the better team in. But at the end of the day, it's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold, and I do think BYU's in a spot where if they win out the rest of the way and lose, maybe chaos could hit, but this is going to be a one-bid league. I feel very confident in that, and it's something that I've talked about quite a bit on here, and I thought that well before, BYU was not undefeated anymore. But at the end of the day, I do think it's going to happen unless absolute chaos hits. This is a one-bid league, and it ended this past weekend with BYU falling. The winner, because of that, is the 5th SEC team, because now you have at least one bid stealer that will be totally out of the equation from the Big 12. Now you're just waiting for another pin to drop, whether that's Tennessee, who tends to be that team right about now, it seems, or if you have Ole Miss, let's say, they were to lose this weekend. A&M and Texas were to would slide up a little bit more, even with the loss at the end. This thing could get crazy. Let's just put it that way. Ole Miss could still find their way back into this position. I think A&M could find their way into this spot. I think Texas will probably be the most readily to find their way into this spot, but definitely a lot of different teams that could be affected here. It feels like you're going to have 5 teams that, and maybe there's scenarios there, you don't even have 5 teams that are worthy. You don't even have 5 teams that are worthy of going, but at the end of the day, right now we have 6. I can't imagine it's going to fall by too much at the end of the year, but craziness is what 2024 is about. And then for Tennessee, they need a little bit of help from either Army, USC, or Ohio State. Those are the teams that they're going to be watching over the next couple of weeks. Ohio State, they're hoping for a big win. Whatever that looks like, they're hoping for a big win. For Army or USC, just a 1-point win against that Notre Dame team would be enough for them to slide into that opening spot. So that's what they're waiting for. Whoever that team ends up being, it is Tennessee right now, but could be a different team down the stretch, and that team got a little bit of help this past weekend. The loser is the Tennessee fans' blood pressure, because you won't have answers really until the end of the season, which absolutely stinks, but you will get a good answer this upcoming weekend. Let's say Indiana loses by 14 on Saturday to Ohio State. I won't make my pick. I'm not trying to tip my pick by any means here, but let's just say that were to happen. The ranking is going to be the thing that they're worrying about. The ranking is going to be the thing that decides that if Indiana is above Tennessee in a Tuesday ranking where they lost by 14 points the last Saturday, they're going to get in. Tennessee is almost assuredly out unless anything crazy happens in the last week. They are officially probably out of this race, but there are some side doors. There are some different things that you can go after. Notre Dame falling once would be one of them. A team like Florida beating Ole Miss, or Auburn beating Alabama, or Oklahoma beating Alabama, or Auburn beating Texas A&M. A lot of different things could open up for this Tennessee team if they're able to just win out the rest of the way. But at the end of the day, their blood pressure has to be very, very high, at least for the next 7 days until that next rankings come out. And then it might get a little bit higher when the rankings do come out. But a winner is the fans of College Station, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, and I feel bad. I feel like I might just be jinxing this, but there is a chance we get one of the best games that we have gotten in about a decade in college football. In a couple of weeks, there is a chance we get Texas A&M in Kyle Field at night for a spot in the SEC Championship and the CFP. Whoever loses that is out of the CFP. I feel very confident in that. Neither of those teams have the resume to get in. Whoever wins it is in the SEC Championship, and I think barring anything absolutely crazy that would really put the rest of the CFP in a very, very tough spot going forward, it would be Texas A&M finding their way into it. So it's the big game. It's a game that, just for fun, we've waited 13 years for this game to happen. Just for fun, these teams hate each other more than life itself. So it's going to be really fun. That atmosphere is going to be crazy. I cannot wait for this game. It's the game that, from the beginning of the year, I have never been more excited for one game this year than this one. We are getting it at the very end, which was a little bit frustrating to wait this long, but it's about as good as it can possibly get. The thing is that we have to remind people is They got to get a win Saturday. For all of this to come to play, for all of the stakes, for all of the juice, for all of the energy to come into this stadium, A&M's got to go on the road and win at Auburn. And Texas hosts Kentucky. They just got to get those wins. It's 2 wins that they should get. That A&M Auburn game, sketchy. But at the end of the day, we'll break that one down here, I believe, tomorrow. But there are two games they should win. If they don't, that game loses a lot of juice. If they do win, ooh, buddy, we're going to have a really, really good one in College Station, and one that might just tear down that entire stadium with how loud it's going to be. I've talked about it before. Just check the structural integrity before November 30th on Kyle Field. And then the loser is the people looking for answers, as they have been pretty much all year. Now, this isn't as aggressive as past weeks. We did get some answers. Some of the crazy scenarios in the ACC were officially put to bed. Some of the crazy teams like Washington State officially fell out with the loss to New Mexico. And then you do have the Big 12. They are going to be a one-bid league. With BYU's loss, that feels very, very confident. And then you get the other side of that. That being said, with the Big 12 losing, or with BYU losing, the Big 12 got more confusing this past weekend because there are a lot of teams still in the race, and this weekend will do a lot to answering those questions. Maybe not everything, especially if Colorado were to lose. Things get interesting in a hurry. And then elsewhere, the question is going to be how many teams and from where and all of that craziness, and it's been uniquely hard to nail down. I've gone back and forth on that Tennessee-Indiana conversation about 10 which ways from Tuesday, but at the end of the day, we will figure it all out. Someone's going to be very mad. That's something I can say without hesitation. Someone's going to be mad. Someone's going to think they got screwed. They probably wouldn't have gotten screwed, but at the end of the day, they will feel that way, and we'll see what happens the rest of the way. But definitely going to be interesting to watch this, and it's one of those things where this past weekend, it gave us some answers. It gave us some path to a little bit of a cleaner CFP picture. It's still very mucky. It's still very crazy, and that's what the 12 team gives us. So we got what we wanted. No two ways about that. But let's take a third break here, and when we come back, we got to break down the superlatives as we go into this upcoming weekend. Got to give some love to people from this past weekend. So biggest win, individual performance of the week, statement of the week, and so many more right after this. So stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the winners and the losers from this past weekend, and now let's put a full bow on that Week 12 slate that was just so much fun, at least from my perspective. I know some people called it a sleepy slate, and it was to a certain extent, but it was plenty of fun. I absolutely enjoyed it, and it was definitely a lot of things to pick from it. So let's go ahead and jump into this, and I think we got to talk about the biggest win of the weekend, and let's start with the Georgia Bulldogs. This was huge. It can't be overstated how much a big win this was. It was the win they've been waiting for pretty much all year. I think even that Texas win where you dominate, you absolutely roll that team on the road, it's a huge moment for that program. The offense was still terrible in that game. So there was still a little part of them that was still worried going forward. It showed itself against Florida the upcoming weekend, and now they got the win. They got the win where the offense pulled its weight, where the defense did the thing that Georgia defenses do, and they handled business when they very much had to and came back from a little bit of a deficit. A huge win for them, and definitely one that puts them almost, I don't want to say it with my chest because I'm very nervous something's going to happen, but almost definitely puts them in the CFP championship, barring any disaster over the next 2 weeks. And then you got Oregon. I think this is one of those games that has kind of been laughed at around Twitter world, around a lot of different people that really are just trying to hate. Let's just be totally honest. But at the end of the day, this was the game that showed me that Oregon could win a national championship. As crazy as that sounds, this was the win that showed me that they have the composure, that they have the energy, that they have the leadership that they're going to need to win those really tough games down the stretch of the season. That Ohio State game was absolutely incredible, and it gave me an idea of just how good this team was. This was the one that showed me that they're a national title contender, and as crazy as that sounds, I think the composure cannot be overstated, especially in your 8th straight game. So I feel very impressed with that one. Might have not been the most pretty win, but it was a win that just about everyone that's won a national title just has to get at some point. And then Florida. Florida got a huge win this past weekend. It wasn't necessarily the biggest win when it comes to the CFP by any means. It was huge for this Florida program. I can't overstate how much of a deal that could be down the road. When you look at, let's say 2025, we're sitting here around this time next year, and we're saying they're an 8-2 team in the CFP race, playing really well. DJ Lagway's playing as good as just about anyone in the country. Everything's going very, very smoothly. That will be the game. That will be the moment where all of these fans, all of these players, all of these coaches, even Billy Napier himself, really started to believe that they could turn a corner. There was a number of moments in this season where it felt like, man, Florida's really close. They're fighting really hard, but they're just not getting the win that they very badly need. They finally got the win. And so now it's just about building towards 2025. But as far as I'm concerned, that was the biggest win of the weekend, because I don't think it just changes 2024. I think it changes maybe the next 5 years around Florida football. Then the individual performance of the week, we'll go back to that Georgia game. Carson Beck was incredible, and it wasn't necessarily that it was a hit-you-over-the-head performance with 500 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. It wasn't crazy by any means. He made all the plays he needed to make, including that rushing touchdown, including that rush early on in the game to get everyone into it. He made every play that they possibly could have needed him to, and he was the guy that they need him to, which is just take care of business. Make the play in front of you. Don't do anything too crazy, and then those downfield shots that you can make will open. So he played incredibly well, definitely deserves some respect. We are going to leave someone out that maybe you guys should be in here, but Jahdae Barron is someone I want to give some love to, because I feel like he's not getting quite enough from around the national media as of right now. Jahdae Barron's your Jim Thorpe Award winner. If it goes any other way, we have a problem, because this dude is incredible. He is all over the place. There has not been a receiver that he has faced that has had a good day against him, regardless of who that guy is. I mean, Alex Armstrong, when he was up against him on Saturday, 1 catch for 2 yards. It was domination from Jahdae Barron. He got a pick. He got a sack later in the game. He was all over the place. And then Alfred Collins is another guy that we should talk about in this game in particular. This kid is becoming a first-round talent. If you are not watching Alfred Collins right now, go ahead and flip him on, because you're going to want your team to draft him in the NFL. I promise you that. He had a forced fumble that was really the sealer in this game, but even before that, the kid's just all over the place. Even in plays where he doesn't make the tackle, he's blowing up one of the offensive linemen and making it so much easier for someone else to make a tackle. So he's remarkably good. He's one of those guys that gets overshadowed by all of the stuff around Texas right about now, but he's as important as just about anyone and as talented as just about anyone on that entire team. And then Tyler Warren, just had to give some love here because the dude's a freak. I just absolutely love watching this kid. He's become one of my favorite players in college football this year. There are some people saying he should go to the Heisman ceremony. Let's pump the brakes just a little bit there. But at the end of the day, he had an incredible game against Purdue, 190 total. He was the leading receiver and rusher. Just, of course he was, because he's that good. But at the end of the day, he's so much fun, and he might have just locked up the Mackey Award for the best tight end in the country. And then statement of the week is another one that I think is interesting. Colorado, to me, it was a relatively understated win. It was a relatively understated game with a lot of the other stuff going on around them. But at the end of the day, you go down early, you have a pick on the very first play, and then you just win in dominating fashion. You just absolutely roll this team every which way from Tuesday, and BYU falls just for fun, so you get a little bit more of a juice. But it was a statement to the college football world that this isn't just a run, this isn't just a really fun story, this isn't just a team that's playing really good football right now. This is a team that can make it to the CFP, no doubt about that. I'm a little skeptical if they can compete with some of the big boys when they get there, but at the end of the day, it's been an incredible story, an incredible coaching job, and we'll see if it has a nice ending there. For BYU, this one was huge, no doubt about that. I thought that, this is one of the reasons that I think Tulane is the best group of 5 team going forward, but as of right now, when you slow down a Navy rushing offense, that's the most insane thing that you can do. And it's not even that they slowed it down, not even like Navy got 150, they got 200 on the ground. It wasn't close to that. Their leading rusher had 31 yards in this game. Tulane was absolutely dominant on the defensive side of the ball, and if that's the case against Navy, Army's going to have their work cut out for them. I can promise you that. And then South Carolina deserves a lot of respect here. This was a huge statement for them because even if they don't get into the CFP, which I've said they likely will not, if they do, then everything has happened over the last couple of weeks. Literally everything you can think of has happened that should not happen. But at the end of the day, it sets you up incredibly well for 2025. You have the fan buy-in, you have the booster buy-in, you have the talent on that team to make this a real SEC contender going into 2025. Finish it with 2 more wins, especially the one over Clemson. This team gets really, really interesting as we head into the 2025 SEC year. But now we'll get to the loser of the weekend, and we'll start with that Tennessee team. This one hurts. There's no doubt about that. They beat Georgia. There is no question. They are a CFP team. They're probably heading to Atlanta for the ACC or the SEC championship. So this one hurts. And now you're in the weirdest spot. You're in probably the worst spot in the CFP race right about now because you can't really do anything other than win the rest of your games. You have to wait for someone else to do something, which is just a nightmare. But as of right now, they still have a very good shot at the CFP, but definitely something to watch as we get into this weekend. And then Pitt, this season went from one of the best stories in college football to the end in a hurry. I mean, it was 3 weeks ago. They were 7-0. They were rolling into SMU for a huge one. They get rolled in that one. They come back home. They lose to Virginia. They go on the road. They lose to Virginia. They come back home. They lose to Clemson. Just very, very tough, and especially with the way that game ended, had to hurt just a little bit more than it normally would. And then BYU. This one is devastating. It doesn't necessarily break your hopes. It doesn't necessarily take you out of the Big 12 championship. What it does do is set up a must-win game in Tempe, Arizona, and that's less than ideal with how Arizona State is playing right now. So you're in a position where this game isn't necessarily the end of the world. You just set yourself up on the end of the world this upcoming weekend. And then surprise of the week, I think the biggest one to me was the Georgia line of scrimmage domination. I did not expect that to happen. They were all over Nico the entire day, and they had 5 sacks on it. Tennessee had 2. And if you were to ask me who's the better pass rush unit, who's the better defensive line going into the game, I would have said Tennessee. Pretty decidedly, I would have said Tennessee. But at the end of the day, Georgia rolled, and that offensive line played the best game of the year by a pretty comfortable margin. The other thing is Cade Klubnik's speed. This kid can scoot, man. He can really go. I did not realize he had that in him. I knew he could run. I didn't know he could run like that. I didn't know he could run away from cornerbacks for a touchdown, but that's exactly what he did. It looks like Matt Luke is just as confused as I was when I was watching this, but he definitely deserves some love. Obviously, a little bit of a minor thing in the grand scheme of this week, but incredible moment, and man, that kid can fly just a little bit more than I thought he could. And then this low-quality picture is because there was a pick 6 that happened in a Fordham game this weekend that just has to be talked about. I'm sure some of you have seen this video around the internet, but let's just break it down. Trey Bradford made a great pick late in the game for, I believe they were playing Georgetown. Yeah, they were playing Georgetown. They got a late pick late in this game, and he picks off the ball, takes about 2 steps, and immediately pulls his hamstring. And he's wobbling, looks like he might be going out of bounds, and then he just pitches it back to Alex Kemper, who takes it all the way. So, Alex Kemper, congratulations. You got credit for a pick 6 in this game, but didn't get a credit for a pick. As crazy as that sounds, that is what happened here. So, really insane. One of those things where it's as college football as it possibly gets. 3 things that never happen on a college football field all happen right in succession with each other, and it ended the way that a college football game would, where you have a pulled hamstring, you just toss it back to your friend, and he goes 80 yards for a touchdown. But wild finish in one of those games that it was a blowout at the end of the day, but this was one of those plays that just made me smile. I'll be totally honest with you. But then game of the week is a little bit of a tough one. It's a lot of really, really fun games that kind of went down to the wire. But we'll start with that New Mexico Washington State game. This game was awesome. It was so much fun. It was a little bit back and forth at times. Washington State held a 14-point lead at halftime, and then New Mexico State came back and was able to upset them. We got 2 just incredible quarterback performances that I really did think about bringing them up in the individual performances, but figured I would bring them up now. Devon Dampier, John Mateer were just incredible on Saturday, so that one was just so much fun to watch, including the upset. Florida LSU, it was a little bit stagnant at times. It wasn't necessarily the most high-flying or crazy game of the week, but to me, this felt like a balloon. This entire game felt like a balloon, and really the entire year for Florida in a lot of different ways, but specifically this game. it kept getting bigger. It kept getting bigger. The pressure kept mounting. Everything kept getting a little bit more crazy. These fans kept getting a little bit more biting their nails and a little bit more nervous. And then Jaden Ball broke the run. And then he broke down the sideline. He crossed the goal line, and it popped. That place exploded. That place was absolutely insane. It was so much fun to watch. It was what college football is about. When you see someone cross the goal line, you see all the fans go crazy. That was a moment, and it was a moment that hopefully will be remembered for quite some time under Billy Napier at Florida, but as of right now, a huge win for them and a great game to go along with it. Then Missouri, South Carolina, this one was best. There's no doubt about that in my mind. I think you look at a South Carolina team that needed the win, you look at a Missouri team that badly needed the win, you had South Carolina rolling early in this game. It really felt like South Carolina was going to be able to pull away. The Missouri offense wasn't quite where it needed to be, but then Missouri came storming back in this game, scored a touchdown with about a minute left, felt like they had it, and then South Carolina came right back down. Rocket Sanders crossed the end zone, and that stadium just loses its mind. I love that stadium so much. I haven't had the pleasure of being able to go up there to experience a game, but I'm going to try to very badly. You know what? I'm going to say it on here. I will be at a game in South Carolina, in Columbia, South Carolina, for a game next year. I'm going to say it. I'm going to make that statement. If everyone hold me accountable on that, because I have to get to that stadium. I have to get there at night because it's special. There's no two ways about that. But let's take our final break here, going a little bit long today, but let's take our final break here, and when we come back, let's break down my top 15 teams in the country. We have a little bit of a shakeup that might make some people mad, but at the end of the day, I'm going to stick to my guns on this one, so we'll break it down right after this. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down all of the superlatives for this past weekend, kind of tied a little bit of a bow on this week 12 slate, and now time to get into week 13, and we'll break it down with my top 15 teams in the country as we head into it. It will have some shakeups, and I've said something on here before that will come into play here, and I'll explain it here in a second. But a lot of things happened this past weekend. Some teams that you don't know how far you want to drop them, like BYU. You don't know how far you want to, ding some teams like Tennessee that lost this past weekend, but I still think is a very talented team. I did my best. I'll leave it at that for the time being. I know people will be not too jazzed about this, but I'll roll with it for the time being. Tulane's at 15. This is the best team in the group of 5. Now, we can have a conversation of whether a 12-1 Boise State is getting in. I'm not arguing that. I don't necessarily think there's too much of an argument for Tulane in that respect. That being said, I'm ranking teams on who I think is the best team. That is the better team. I feel very confident when I say that. I think they will be the better team, even if they do finish 11-2 this year with an American title, miss out because Boise State goes 12-1. I'll still think that's the best team in the group of 5. Now, doesn't necessarily matter too much if you don't have the resume to go along with it, but Tulane is my number 15 team. They are the best team in the group of 5, and as of right now, that's what matters to me when I'm making these rankings, at least for the group of 5 specifically. Colorado. They're jump up into the top 15 this week. I cannot be more impressed with what Deion has done. I've said it a million times, but I can say it a million more because it's absolutely ridiculous. What's been kind of overshadowed with this team, I do think, is what this D-line has become. It's been a really, really good group down the stretch of the season. Obviously, Big Ten against SEC. little bit different of a battle, so we'll see what happens in the possible playoff matchup. But at the end of the day, they're in a really, really good spot. Kansas is lurking there, no doubt about that, but they're the best team in the Big 12 as far as I'm concerned, and we'll see if their season gets ruined this week. But as of right now, Colorado's doing the thing that Dion said that they were going to do, and me and a lot of people, including myself, called him a little bit crazy for thinking that, but here he is. A&M, I have at 13. They jump right back up into the top 15 this weekend. They got their boring game out of the way. Let's just be honest. They played New Mexico State this past weekend, one of those games that the SEC should just stop playing, but that's a side argument we can get into another day. But they're still in a very good position to make the CFP. It's all about winning out, no doubt about that. I don't think they would get left out if they got to Atlanta, but could be debated. We'll see what happens there. But very, very good team. I think Marcel Reed, you're probably going to need a little bit more from him down the stretch, but we'll see what happens there. And then obviously a huge game this weekend in Auburn, an even bigger one at home against Texas in the final week. Miami, they're a team at 12 right now. I think one of those teams that's just in a weird spot as they head forward. No craziness by any means. If they win out, they are going to the ACC Championship. They're still in a very good position going forward. I'm not necessarily arguing they're in a bad spot for the CFP. It's just a weird one because you have a Clemson team that is fully done with their ACC schedule, and then you got to play two more. It just feels like someone's over your shoulder watching you. It just feels like someone's waiting for you to misstep, and it can be hard to handle all of that. So we'll see what happens. It could come to a screeching halt this upcoming week, or maybe against Syracuse at the end of the year, or this thing could keep rolling and they could get right back on track and into the CFP at the end of the day. SMU right on top of them. This team was a little bit less impressive this past weekend, but got a win against a team that had a little bit of feisty to them in Boston College. But at the end of the day, they're in a place where really since that Pitt win, they've been absolutely rolling. They've been setting the pace in the ACC. They should be in Charlotte. If they're able to win against Virginia this upcoming weekend, they will have to punch their ticket. If they win the last weekend, they will have punched their ticket. So they're in a really good spot. Just need to win one of the next two. Probably want to win both of them if I'm being totally honest, just for the seeding aspect, where don't want to get beat out by a Boise State or someone like that. But as of right now, you're in a really good spot and you're leading the ACC, which is about as good as you can possibly ask for. Notre Dame at 10, they continue to handle business. This is probably about as high as you're going to see them go, at least in my rankings. Now, not to say this team isn't capable of game, getting past the first round, doing all of that stuff. No doubt about that. I'm not arguing that by any means. But at the end of the day, I just think there are some teams on top of them that would beat them on a neutral field or would just beat them in a playoff scenario. So I rolled with those teams for the time being. But you get the next two wins, you're probably hosting a playoff game. And with that defense that you have at home, maybe a little bit cold for those SEC teams, maybe you got to win there. So there's still a lot of juice around this team, and they're handling business. Just don't necessarily have the resume of some of the other teams on top of them. And this would be one of those teams. Tennessee, I'm dropping to 9. I could not drop them much longer after this one. This is a very, very good team. This is a team that is a top 12 team in the country. I think they have one of, if not the best defense in the country. Nico is slowly finding it. This is a very good team. If they get left out, it really will not be their fault. It will, well, they did lose to Arkansas on the road. I'm not necessarily trying to totally dismiss that from the conversation. But if they do get left out, it will be a lot to do with the formatting of this playoff and the fact that we have auto bids and have a G5 bid and all of that type of stuff. That would be the reason that they get left out. But also, they lost to Arkansas is another reason that they would get left out. Georgia at 8, they bump up just a little bit here, but they got the win that they needed. They got the win that really gives them a chance to look in the mirror and say, we are Georgia. We have every ability to go out and win a national title. We just got to play that way the rest of the way. So consistency is something that remains to be seen and has been a problem for this team really all year. But if that's the Carson Beck you're getting going forward, if that's the offense you're getting, especially the offensive line you're getting going forward, this is a team that can win a national title. As upsetting as that sounds for a lot of different people around there, they could get 3 out of 4 this year. Crazy, but they absolutely could. Ole Miss right here at number 7. Thought about bumping them up one more, but just couldn't quite do it. I do think they're one of the more underrated teams in the country, in my mind. The defensive line is absolutely insane. The offensive line is getting better and better week in, week out. They didn't have Trey Harris for a lot of these games in the past couple of weeks, and were able to get wins. Once that guy comes back, it's going to be a nightmare to stop this offense. So overall, this is a very dangerous team, and I think regardless of if it's, I don't think they'll be hosting a game if I had to imagine, but let's say they don't host a game. I don't think anyone wants to invite this team into their place. I'll be totally honest. I think this is one of those teams that's downright terrifying. But win out and they're in, lose at any point, and they're officially out. I feel very confident in that. Alabama at 6. This Alabama team has about as high of a ceiling as anyone in the country. When you have a guy like Jalen Milroe that can do the stuff that he can do athletically, you're going to be able to have a lot of fun. Let's just be totally honest. Now, they do have Oklahoma and Auburn standing in their way, but you win those 2 games, you're on the way to Atlanta for the year 1 of Kalen DeBoer. A lot of people in that t-shirt crowd are going to be a little bit upset about that, but here you are. You got a really good coach, and wouldn't you know it, you're winning a lot of football games. That's crazy how that works. But at the end of the day, Alabama here at 6, still in a very good position, and very well could get one of those byes if they go to the SEC Championship and beat Texas or Texas A&M. Penn State at 5. They're one of those teams that very comfortable. They got a very easy win against Purdue this past weekend. This team is very, very good. It comes down to the offense. Can that offense be efficient week in, week out is a question against these elite teams out there. But at the end of the day, Drew Aller just got to hit his spots. He just got to be efficient. He just got to go through this offense the way that it was designed. Doesn't need to do anything else. With that defense, with that run game that you have, you should just be able to execute down the stretch of the season, get into the CFP, and then you probably will have to elevate just a little bit. Indiana at 4. I think a lot of people want to be ranking Indiana down at 9 or down at 10 or playing around with their rankings just for fun. This team deserves respect. I can't say it enough. I understand it's not the toughest schedule in the world. I understand that Georgia's played infinitely tougher. I understand Alabama and Ole Miss and Tennessee and even Texas have played infinitely tougher schedules. I don't really care. I'll be totally honest with you. This team walked out every single week and handle business the way that you would expect a Georgia to handle business against those teams, the way you would expect an Alabama to handle business against those teams. They weren't the toughest teams in the world. I'm not arguing that by any means, and I've said it before, if Indiana gets rolled this weekend, they should not be in. But this team is really good, and I feel like we're discounting what Indiana's doing right now. I feel like we're discounting what Curt Cignetti's doing right now. It has been remarkable. I don't care who you're playing. If you're going 10-0 in your very first year at a place like Indiana, you're doing really special things. Now, we can talk about whether or not they deserve it, but we'll talk about it right after that Ohio State game and not a second sooner, because at the end of the day, I don't know what deserving or not deserving means coming out of that Ohio State game. But as of right now, just wanted to go on a little bit of a rant because way too many people disrespecting the Hoosiers as if they're just an outright bad team. They're not. They just haven't played the toughest schedule in the world. Good news is they won most of their games by 28 points. So you don't have to worry too much about this being a good football team. We'll obviously find out more this weekend, but getting a little sick of the Hoosiers' disrespect. That's all I'm going to say right now. Texas at number 3. They struggled this weekend, no doubt about that. The offense feels to be a little bit boom or bust. Quinn Ewers, if they're going to win a national title, that has to just elevate his play. There's no doubt about that. And everyone around that program has said it. I bet Quinn is thinking it right about now. So he's just got to be a little bit better. He is fully capable of being that guy. I mean, we've seen it throughout his career. We've seen it at Alabama. We saw it at Michigan earlier this year. We've seen it in Red River a couple of years ago. The dude can play. The dude can play at an elite level. The problem is you got to get that run game going. You got to get in protection. And if you can do both those things, it's going to be a really, really hard team to stop. The problem is they have a really high ceiling. They have a really high floor. They're playing a little bit closer to the floor than they need to right about now. Ohio State at 2. They took care of business in Wrigley this past weekend. They're looking about as good and about as complete as any team in the country. They just didn't beat that number 1 team. So they're going to be behind them here, but they're as elite as anyone, and with a win this weekend, they would have a shot to avenge that one loss against Oregon, the number 1 team in the country. This weekend did worry me just a little bit, but I do think people are discounting it a little bit more than they should. It was 8 straight games in a row for Oregon, 3rd time on the road in 5 weeks. It's very, very tough to win those games, especially at night in Camp Randall. I'm going to give them a little bit of a pass here. Every single team that has won the national title over the last 25 years, or really in the playoff era, but let's just say 25 years just for fun. They have had one of those games. They have had a game where it gets ugly, where they don't play good football, where they're all over the place, where the offense doesn't show up when they should, and they find a way to win. That is what championship teams do. It can be 16-13. It can be 3-0. It does not matter. Finding a way to get that win, move on with your undefeated season, maybe lock up an undefeated season as the only team in the Power 4 to do it. But at the end of the day, it is going to be really, really interesting to watch this team the rest of the way. They are as complete as can be. They're as talented as can be. And as long as they don't have one of those sleepy performances in the Big Ten championship or in the playoff, I expect this team to win a couple of playoff games and be firmly in the mix for a national title. But a ton of really fun stuff this past weekend. I'll be totally honest with you. I thought about going a little bit too heavy into SEC bias. And I hate to say it, but I really did think about bumping Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, maybe even Tennessee above Indiana and Penn State. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it because winning football games just has to matter. I understand that games aren't quite as aggressive, aren't quite as intense, and I've said time and again, the SEC is the best conference in the country. They play the best football. They are the deepest conference in the country. You also got to give some respect to a team that's going 11 or 10-0 in the Big 12, in the Big 10. So I'm going to leave it alone for the time being. I'm going to hold water for Indiana. That being said, if Indiana were to lose by a lot this weekend, they fully deserve to be at number 4 right now. They would also fully deserve to be at number 12 if they were to lose to Ohio State pretty decidedly. But obviously, something that we will handle this weekend, we'll probably talk much more about throughout this week, if I'm being totally honest, because that is the story going into this weekend. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow for a Notre Dame Army breakdown. But going to be an incredible day, and we'll get into our breakdowns tomorrow, so tune in for that.